They came up today. Sells cars. Buys and sells cars. One of the cars he didn't want to sell. He didn't want to make a profit on because he didn't like the car. He wanted to get rid of the stock. So he said to the person, I'll sell it to you for cost price. The person was very excited to get the cost price. He said, okay. When he picked it up, so he said to the person, it's going to cost you 4,000. That's how much it is cost price. The next day, he looked through his papers again and he realized the cost price was 5,000. So he called him up and said, okay, the cost price is 5,000. And what would you say? It's an What would you say?
I say he's asking 5,000. Well, the guy might not want it.
You paid the 4. You paid the 4. You paid the 4,000.
If the guy felt bad, you can say, I'll give it back if you want, but he's got no excuse over that.
I think he's allowed to try and get his reaction.
I think the it's human error.
Well, you hear the Shaila? The halacha is he's allowed to ask for that. He's allowed to track this. Yeah, the guy can give it back. The guy can give it back. Yes. He can insist on this £5,000. Yeah. Because he said to him, I'm selling it to you at cost, and cost was 5, not 4.
He said 4, he wouldn't have taken it for 5.
No. So you can give it back. You can give it back. You can give it back. But you can't say I got it for 4,000. That's it.
But he has to get the money.
He has to give the 5,000. There wasn't Beis, it was a different place. But it was a nice. It was quite interesting. Well, it was nice that both people were very respectful. I was very impressed. To buy and sell of a cars, and they both really wanted to do the right thing.
Even though he probably wasn't happy about it.
I wasn't happy about it, but you say he paid 5,000 for the car. Okay. What? What was the deal? It was a Tesla, Jaguar, BMW.
What? Oh wow! That guy who walks into the.
Was that a good car?
That's Kilayim.
I have no idea. One thing I don't know anything about is cars. If I ever want to know about a car, that's my church. I know nothing about them. When someone says that's a Jaguar, I say, how are you supposed to know it's a Jaguar? I don't know, I can't remember these things. We're up to Daf Tessa Medalef, about 7 lines from the top. We've got very, very, very important Gemara. Omar Rabba Baba Chanoma Birichnom. My Dechsev. Oh, it's very nice to see you. What is this? Wow, look at this. Where did you get it from? Very nice. Oh, where did you print it out?
What is it?
How did you download it? Look at this.
Send me a link.
It's pictures of. No, I tell you, this is very good. Remember, we had a whole discussion. We're going to have it again about the belt of the Kohen Gadol, Beit Kohen Gadol. Okay, anybody who gets this right deserves at least 2 lechaims. What color was the belt of the Kohen Gadol, and what color was the belt of a normal Kohen? Kohen Gadol, Kohen Gadol.
Like a brownish color.
I tell you, I've got very bad news for all of you. Oh,
I have one L'chaim.
no lechaims. The same machlokas reading. I say this machlokas. Very, very brief. Now I say, Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, everybody agrees white. Kohen Gadol around the year, everybody agrees colored. Kohen Hedget always is a machlokas white or colored. And here's a picture which Yosef brought in. Here it shows Kohen Gadol colored, so it's during the year, not Yom Kippur. Here it's showing Kohen Hedget white, and that's not accurate. I'm saying it's not right. Why is it not right? It's machlokas. Very good. Okay, let's get into it. Thank you. Wait a second. This is the whole Yoma.
The whole Yoma.
How much it cost to print it out? Why did you print it? Okay,
Because I work with Snapchat.
So okay, let me know how much. Okay, we'll have to work that. Okay. Yeah, if you got a link to it.
How many pages?
No, just the link. Just the link.
Because
You
you
can't.
can't send an email.
No,
No, but the link, the email.
I had to call in and send me the link. I paid for the link. I can't pass it on.
How much?
It's 20 shekels.
Okay.
It's 20 shekels.
That's
Well,
£5. £5. Okay, very nice. Very good. Okay. What does the pasuk mean when it says Yiras Hashem Tosef Yomim? Fear of Hashem adds days. V'shneis Hashem Tiktzano. Yiras Hashem Tosef Yomim is the Mikdash Rishon. It's the first base of Mikdash. We're up to Daf Tes Amud Aleph, almost the last of the thin lines. She'omad, how many years was the first base of Mikdash standing for?
320.
No, first base of Mikdash Rashi the 6th Pasha, 410. She'omad Abamos V'Esashanim. Le'Shim Shebel Yudches Kanim Gedolim, only 18 Kanim Gedolim. Those of you who've got an article, at the very back of volume 1, they've got an appendix. And that appendix discusses the Kanim Gedolim that existed in the first place of Mikdash. You don't have it? You must have it.
I'm sure I've got it.
No, go back, look at it. No, sorry.
Yeah, I've got it.
You've got it, you know.
Old edition. The old edition.
Stop.
Oh, yeah, here we go.
Here it is.
Yeah.
And I was very, very taken by it. You should go through it at your own time.
23.
18.
410 years.
Wait a second. The Gemara over here says, if you look very carefully, how many Kanim Gedolim was it the Gemara say? 18. And if you look in the Gon, how many does the Gon say? Look in the Gon. Look at the Gon. Okay. How much does the Gon say? How many Kanim Gedolim does the Gon say? Hagos Shnemos, so 12. So either there was 18, or there was 12, or there was more or less. You can look through it. I was very, very taken by it. And it goes through it. I cannot go through it in the Shiur, but there was very limited amount of Kanim Gedolim. The Shlois Hashem Tiktzano is the Mikdash Sheni. She'omad Abamos V'Esrim Shani was 420 years. V'Shim Sheba Yosem Shlois Shebos Kanim, more than 300. Sorry, Tzim Mehem. And out of the 420, you have to minus quite a lot of them. How many? Shimon Tzadik was the first, or it was the last of the Shur Knesset Gdola, and he was for 40 years. Anybody know the famous story of Shimon Tzadik? What was the famous story? Alexander, not Caesar, bowed down to him because he saw him in his Gekona. 18 that Yechon Kohen Gadol was, that's already 120. What happened to Yechon Kohen Gadol and then 80 years? Became a tzduki. Very good. 10 years that Shimon Pavi, already up to 130. Some say another Yudalef, another 11. So 121 of the 420 is already gone by 4 people. And besides that, there was another 300. That means none of them actually lived out to be a year. None of them lived to be a year. In fact, much less than a year. In fact, the others who asked, Rabbi Shiur ben Tzadok also was a Kohen Gadol for 36 years. So in fact, of these 300 Kohanim, they all lived a very, very short amount of time. None of them lived to be a whole year. Now, over here, we've got a Bach that adds about 2-3 lines to the Gemara. I'm going to do it because many of those Shonim bring it. If you go to Nagarsa Bach, it's Ois Aleph. Why did they suffer this fate? They would pay for it. A measure of gold coins. It's like a big bowl of gold coins. Molsa Basbaisis was a woman, paid Yana Yamalka at the Yeshua ben Gamla, the kind of Avavi. She wanted Yeshua ben Gamla to be a Kohen Gadol. So what happened was she paid the king a lot of money. But Omar Bichman Tosa says there's a mitzvah Eisam over here that tells us about the Gemara, famous Gemara. I'll just say it briefly. Bichman the son. What's Tosa mean? Does anybody know what the word Tosa means? An ox, a cow. Very good. How could a Bichman be the son of a cow? He brings mitzvah Eisam on the back of the Gemara. If you've got a young eye, those who go ask won't have it. Those who don't ask might have it. Mitzvah Eisam is the back of the Gemara. I'm telling you, you've got it. It's very, very small until you find it. But Beis says very, very interesting thing. The Gemara tells us the famous story of the man who sold the cow to a goy, and the goy didn't work on Shabbos. He came back to him and said to him, "You're selling me a dud. What kind of cow is it?" So he whispered in his ear. What did he whisper? That now you no longer belong to a yid. You can work on Shabbos. And he started working. And the goy said to himself, if an animal is able to appreciate Kedusha Shabbos, a human being, and he became a ger. Gershon is guy it's like as if a new birth. It's as if he came into birth. So he was born from an ox. Okay. Why was Shiloh destroyed? Had two averos. Gilu avoyos ubzoin kodshim. The Gemara in Shabbos Daf Nun Hey goes through it and minimizes the avera. We haven't got time to really go through that Gemara. I'm just saying this briefly. The Gemara makes it as if Shiloh had two terrible averos. Gilu avoyos. The Chsiv Eli Zokin Moed. Eli was very old. The Shomas Kol Hashiyas and Bonov. The sons of Eli. Who are the sons of Eli? Who are the sons of Eli?
Chofni and Pinchas.
Oh, very good. Chofni and Pinchas. No, that is Rabbi Shpilman. Eli Shpilman. Oh, you changed your name. Eli Shpilman. Very good. Yeah, now you've lost your friends. That's it's insult. Yes. Gilu avoyos oh, Eli Shomash Kol Hashiyas Bonov Chol Yisroel Sashay Yishkevod Es Anoshim At Soivos Pesach Ol Moed. They would sleep with the woman that came to the Moed. There are many explanations what it means that they did znus with them. Some say that what happened was would keep them waiting till they brought the korbanos, if they were away from their husbands. That was a form of znus. Some say that people would go past the women who were waiting for the korbanos to be brought, and they would think about them, so they caused znus. Others say that because the women were waiting outside the Mishkan Shiloh, so every night they would sleep there, so they would sleep out in the open, men and women mixed, and therefore would cause a certain znus to happen, a certain kalus to happen. That they sinned in the Torah, Mitoich, top of Testament base, nice and Lamed, to show is Kineya and Mia Malan and the Kosu Kirishachim, it's as if they actually slept with them. Bizarre culture of the Chsiv. Before the Kohen would sacrifice the fats, the young lad of the Kohen would come, and he would say to the one who was bringing the korban, to know boss litznos, give me meat to roast that Kohen. But I want it raw, I want it ready now. The man would say to him, one who bought the korban, first bring up the fats, and then take what you want. Give me now, if not, I'll take it by force. They caused a disgust, they caused a despising of the Mincha of Hashem. There are two main explanations as to what they did wrong. The halacha is that every kohen is allowed from every shlomim. What's a kohen allowed from a shlomim? Chazeh v'shoik, very good. When is he allowed to take it? Only after he sacrificed the fats. After he sacrificed that which goes to Mizbeach, that take the chazeh v'shoik. Here, the sons of Eli would take it before, and they would take it by force. Another explanation what they did wrong was they would, besides the chazeh v'shoik, they would take an extra fork and stab the pot, and anything that came out, they would add to their portion to take an extra piece of meat which we were not entitled to. So the Mavaza Kodshim, it's a very nice word for the Ben Yehuda, a beautiful word, and he says like this. He says, where was Mishkan Shiloh, and whose shevet was it in? Yosef, very good. Shevet of Yosef. What was very special about Yosef? What was very special about Yosef was that he was careful with his eyes. He didn't look at Potiphar. So therefore he was the Demus, was Kodesh. Yosef, we call him Yosef Tzaddik. Tzaddik meaning that he was shaded to the Zeitzah. These people went and showed to be Zoyan from mitzvahs, and they were nichshal at some level of znus. And therefore should have to be destroyed, because no longer the whole chus of it was based on Yosef, and Yosef with this Kedusha, and they got rid of the Kedusha, and therefore they lost the Mishkan Shiloh. Mikdash Rishon b'fnei Machar basically was destroyed, but they give them the three worst averos. Avodah Zarah v'gilu avodos sheichus damim. Avodah Zarah d'chsiv kotza matzah mistareach. The bed is too short from sleeping on it. It's 3 lines down. Well, the middle lines. My kotza matzah mistareach. Amar Yunison kotza matzah zed. This bed is too short. Mistarel of shnei meim ke'echot. To have 2 men and 1 woman in one bed is too short. The bed. So the pasuk says over here, Ki'ilu kibiyochel v'akshvochu was having. We all know that Menashe put a tselem. He put an avodah zarah mamish in the kodesh hakadoshim. So to speak, Akshvochu says there's no space for the 2 of us. Masechet Zor ki skanis. Omar Rabbi Shimon Nachmeni ki moter Rabbi Yisrael ha'ikrom. When he came to this pasuk, Bochi, he would cry, Omar madich sibe. Koines kaned me'ayom. The one that gathers water like a jug. Nasis le Masechet Zor. It was the biggest chutzpah in the world. Now here you have, in the Beis Hamikdash, they would have a Masecha, a Musaf Avodah Zarah, should be a competitor to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who is the one that can gather all the water in the world. So therefore, the Masecha is a loshon of Pesach of the idol. Sarah became a competitor to Hiskanes, the one who can gather all the water of the world. It says, the Apostle describes how the Yiddish girls would try their best to get boys to look at them. And what they would do is they would try all tactics. And the Apostle describes and more explains afterwards the Apostle. They have become arrogant, become high and mighty. But they went with the neck stretched up. And with the eyes looking and trying to attract attention. Walking and floating. They would walk. And with their feet they inject poison. And the more explains, they would get a tall girl to walk next to a short girl so that she should stand out greater and therefore attract more attention. But to is going, they would go very, very tall and stretch their necks. They would fill the eyes with eyeshadow in order, with eye, wherever you put an eye, in order to make the eyes look nice. They would walk very, very carefully, one step behind the other. That means the one heel to the ankle. That means the toes to the ankle. That way, when you walk very slowly, you look like you're floating. Back then, when they take perfume, they would put inside the shoes. They would go next to Yiddish boys, they would kick the feet, and the perfume would spritz, like the poison of a snake. And what they would do is that the smell of the perfume which they would shoot out would make such an attraction that it would go literally into the minds and the hearts of the Yiddish boys. Pinkas used to say, and it's sorry, every now with the Corona, I remember it, buses every night go from Shnaim to Bnei back and vice versa, or to the chasnas. And he said that women should put on the perfume only after they get to the chasnas, not before, because they're sitting on the bus for hours and it's not right. Shvichus Dam Dichsib. Menashe killed a lot of people. He filled Yerushalayim for blood from one end to the other end. Now, what does it mean that Menashe filled up Yerushalayim with blood? How did he manage to fill Yerushalayim, the whole Yerushalayim with blood? Once Najah says two explanations. One is he used to kill 1,000 people every day for his Avodah Zarah. 1,000 people every day he would kill in the burdens of the Avodah Zarah. Another explanation, once Najah says he killed his grandfather. Who was the grandfather of Menashe?
Yeah.
Menashe, who's the grandfather? No, I'm talking about Menashe, the wicked king, the son of Chizkiah. Yeshaya Novi. He killed Yeshaya Novi. Now again, said, this Menashe, who every day killed 1,000 people for the Zohar, killed his grandfather Yeshaya, put a tselem in the Heichel. Does anybody know what happened to him? He did tshuva.
He became the king of 8 years old.
They say he did tshuva. Now, yeah, he did the
He put his face through.
No, that was Chizkiah Melech. Chizkiah Melech did tshuva. Chizkiah Melech was a tzaddik. He did one small avera, didn't get married, and he turned to the war. Menashe was the huge Rasha. He said that very, very, very briefly that Menashe was taken by the king of Ashur, and the king of Ashur boiled him in a pot. And while it was being cooked, he davened every Avodah Zarah, none of them helped. And then he said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that my father Chizkiah said, "Batzar locha mutzucha kol advar ma'ela v'shavta d'Hashem Elokecha." When you're in pain, I remember Moshe Kupitz said over that you could see that Chizkiah Melech gave Musa to his son every day, and nothing came of it. The son gave Rasha. But in the end of the day, it flickered through his mind when he came to the central point, and therefore it was. You can see, you never know when you say something when it's have an effect. The Maisa, what Shmuel said, a very strong point, is that when Menashe said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if you forgive me, good. If you don't forgive me, and then I'll serve you. If you don't forgive me, I will say that you're like all other gods. So he asked the question, how can he say such an argument? Bishlem, all the other desires, they ought to save him, because he had served them faithfully his whole life. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu not. It's a very nice point. Well, Menashe's, and the Gemara says that Hashem accepted this truth. which is an unbelievable tshuva, with chutzpah v'azah and everything else. And the Shai he said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if you don't accept me because I've done too many averos, that means your mercy is limited. It's limited. It goes this far, not that far. If that's the case, that your mercy is limited, in what way are you different from any other avodah zarah? Every avodah zarah can say my mercy is limited, and that's why you don't deserve to save it. But if you save me now, then they'll prove that your mercy is unlimited, and therefore Hashem saved him to prove that however big a rasha person is. The Gemara says this, the Nedrin, there's no such thing as you can't do to a person can't do.
What does it mean if not? I will say, you like the other guys, he'll be dead if not.
Yes, but in that few minutes.
Right. Bloody spoiling.
Oh. Aber Mikdash Sheni Sek Beis Mikdash Oiskin Bateo v'Mitzvahs. There was Oiskin Bateo v'Mitzvahs Bunus Chasadim. Ma'achor was destroyed with a Shoyes Sinas Chinam because they had Sinas Chinam. I just want to speak for 2-3 minutes about Sinas Chinam. Sinas Chinam, we all know, is the reason why we're still in Golos. Chaim Chaim and Akdama tells us that Sinas Chinam means Lashon Ha. He has a few proofs. One of them he brings this Gemara. He says Sinas Chinam means Lashon Ha. It's the Akdama to the Chaim. Why does he say it? Because the Yerushalmi finishes off Lamedcha that Lashon Ha is more common than all three Averos. So we see that Sinas Chinam is Lashon Ha. Now, the biggest question about Sinas Chinam is, what's the word Chinam mean in vain? What's Chinam mean? Well, you hate for nothing? There are a few explanations I want to say very briefly. So if from Matnas Chaim, he brings, I think it's between the Chofetz Chaim, I may be wrong, a sweet little marshal. Person comes home, a child comes home, missing a hand. His hand's been cleanly chopped off. Who did it to you? What happened? The teacher did it to you. What's going on? He says, your son was doodling during lesson. So I decided that I need to teach him not to do that again. So well, that's not a reason. That's not a reason. He says, about this Chaim, what do you mean that's not a reason? It is a reason. How can you say it's not a reason? The answer is that to do such a terrible thing, the reason that you're giving is not a reason at all. Sinas Chinam, you're cutting yourself off from another Yid. So you think that you've got a reason. But klape, what you've done, it's not a reason at all. That's what he says. It's very easy. He brings it to the nice mahalach. That's what's called Sinas Chinam. The Yaivit says a much more simple pshat. As the Gemara Bava Metzia tells us, there are certain people you're allowed to hate. In fact, it's possible to hate him. Tachlis sinos senesim le'uvim hayuli. It's possible to hate him. Tachlis sinos senesim. That a person's supposed to hate a rasha. So sinas chinam means you're hating somebody who's not a rasha. So then it's chinam in the sense that you're not. It's for nothing because it's not a reason which the Torah gave you. You hate him because he said to you a rude comment. But it's not, it's chinam in the sense that it's not within the parameters of the Torah. And finally, there's a go down, Zav Mishvor says, it's from Ben Yona, ancient Dirk, that Ben Yona says that a person has to uproot from his heart the middle of hatred. And what he proves is that the middle of hatred can actually crop up without any reason at all. In fact, what's the question? Sinas Chinam, most people will say to you, I hate so-and-so. He said a rude comment, I hate so-and-so because of this. The reality is, he says, that it is actually possible to hate somebody for no reason at all. After you hate them, then you come up with a reason to justify it. But the reality is, it is actually Sinas Chinam because it's completely in vain. Just like a person has a natural tendency for certain other kinds of bad things, right? Also other things. A person without any effort, without actually trying, can automatically come to hatred. And it's not that you have to work to become hate. You hate automatically. And that is the Sinas Chinam. Right? The Gon says that Sinas Chinam always comes from jealousy. That's what he says. All sinner comes from jealousy. And if you dig deep enough, you will find the source of jealousy. And if you have to go to Maisa, we have to be aware that Sinas Chinam is a very, very powerful thing in the sense that while we have it, then we can't expect Beis Mikdash to be rebuilt. Chaim writes, the famous Moshe, if somebody would come to us and say to us, would you pay some money, will you charity campaign for the Beis Mikdash? Then we would need to take a page, everybody would give without a page. So he says, all HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to you is, stop the middle of Sinas Chinam and then you'll have it. And that's all HaKadosh Baruch Hu is asking for. So Medcha says to the Moshe, Sheskula Sinas Chinam Kei Yisroel Shabbos Ve'os Avodah Zarah Gil Avodah Sheichus Tam. Now the Gemara carries on, the Shoyim Hayu, they were wicked. The Bach and others say that it's actually a mistake. This Gemara is supposed to be earlier. It's referring to the first Beis Mikdash. That means this line is supposed to be earlier. Than the first Beis Mikdash, they were very wicked, but they trusted in Hashem. Its heads, would only judge after getting bribed. Would only do things after they'd been paid. And then the Nevi'im, after getting money, they would. Yiksemu means to, what's a good word for it in English? divine. They would only, Nevi'im would only come up with divination if they would get paid for it. But Hashem Yishanu Leima, Hashem B'Kibenu Le'Suvenu Le'Nu. Lefichol Chibak Tzruach Le'en Gimel Gezeres, Kneged Gul Haver Shviyodam, Hashem gave 3 decrees against 3 Haveros, Shnemar Lechein B'Glalchem Tzion, Sodet Techorish, we plowed over like a field. Yerushalayim, Ian, Tia, Ian. Does anybody know what the word Ian comes from? Avorim, no? No, Avorim, Rashi, Avorim. What's Rashi say? Ian means rubble, means a destroyed place. Beis, the bottom is a desolate spot. I saw very nice. The Mashal says beautifully that there's 3 Abiris over here. It's the Kohanim, Nevi'im, and the Sanhedrin. Moshe is the Sanhedrin. Now, the Sanhedrin was where? In the Beis Mikdash, in Mishkas HaGozis. Where were Kohanim also in the Mishkan, in the Beis Mikdash? Each one was in the Nazar, one was on the Beis. And finally, the Nevi'im, the Gemara says much later in Yoma, that to become a Navi, usually all Nevi'im, almost always, the Gemara says, I think most of that, always, and Navi began his Nevuah in Yerushalayim. That's why Yoma, he became a Navi in Yerushalayim, and he ran away to Yafa, but Maisa, and the Nevi'im becomes Yerushalayim. So therefore, these 3 people, that is the Kohanim, the Sanhedrin, and the Nevi'im, were all, the basis was Yerushalayim. And they all decided to not utilize their gifts to serve Hashem, but rather for their own personal gain. So that's what the Pasuk says, that all these places, Yerushalayim, Sion, and the Beis, will be destroyed, connected these 3 places, and he connects each one of them. One of the Nevi'im in Yerushalayim, the Kohanim is actually in the Azor, and the Sanhedrin is on the Beis. Mikdash Shlish, very nice pshat. Mikdash Shlish Navi Sinas Chinam was a no Sinas Chinam Oksiv. By the way, the Chaim Shulevitz points out that they used to do chesed. So the Gemara says to Chasonim, it's possible to have sinas chinam to do chesed, because a person can sometimes do things of chesed but still have an internal unhealthy attitude towards other people, and it's not enough to do chesed. The person has to actually the people were scared of the sword. So slap your thigh. Sometimes the person is very, very upset. They slap the thigh in anguish. People will eat and drink with each other and be accompanied to each other. And then they would stab each other with their swords, meaning they would say nasty things. This actually, Chofetz Chaim quotes this to prove what?
No,
Two-faced. And Chofetz Chaim quotes this to show you that sinas chinam and noshno is the same thing. Because if you look at it more very carefully, the Chofetz Chaim himself says this. Not me. Sinas chinam was not sinas chinam, and has more carry on. They would stab each other with their tongues, meaning that sinas chinam and noshno are interlinked, right? Because the Gemara says didn't have sinas chinam. You see that they used to stab each other. The Mashal explains the word megure over here is coming from the word. Normal translation of megure is from fear. Gur lochet, be scared. Here the more translation megure from megurim, from living. Megure, those that you live with, you have to be scared of. So that's what the Pasuk over here say, that the people that they lived with and they ate and drank with, they're terrified. I said, well, no. That's the princes. That means only the princes that sinas chinam. Everybody else didn't. It was in my nation. The Pasuk finishes off in Nesi Yisroel. So the Maisa, even though there was sinas chinam, it was only in Nesi Yisroel. We showing him the previous generations. That means the first Beis Hamikdash. The was a revealed one. Is an open Aver. The redemption was revealed 70 years. When the Aver was hidden, the end has not been revealed. We do not know when the third Beis Hamikdash is coming. There are many explanations. Why should a hidden Aver have such a lot more effect than? Oh, that is what the Mashal says. I must admit, I wasn't going to quote it, but since you said it, I'll say it. Because I find it hard to understand that it makes such a dramatic difference. But even mechavan to it, you can look it up inside. Mashal says that when a person does not very in private, it's a bizarre to Hashem. Why? Because instead of other people, you're scared. But in front of Hashem, you're not scared. So therefore, that's why the second Beis Hamikdash was a hidden Aver, so there's chinam, will get much bigger punishment. Actually, the first Beis Hamikdash, when they did that in public, so therefore they weren't scared of people, they weren't scared of Hashem, so therefore it's less of a chutzpah, so therefore the punishment was much shorter, only 70 years. But it's very hard to... Aleph says a much more... I shouldn't say much more. He's in a different idea. I can't say that he says more than Mashal. I'm just saying he's in a different idea from his Rebbe. It says from the Art of Hell that there are 2 different kinds of Averas. There are averos which are internal and averos which are external. Averos which are external are averos which a person does, but inside is okay. That means inside the heart is in the right place, but what happens is he gets caught up with this desire, that desire, and does the wrong thing. Sometimes a person can have an aver where it's internal, and that's much harder. First of all, it's much harder to change, and second of all, the person himself can think that what he's doing is right, because he's pretending to do what's right. So therefore, the person himself cannot sometimes not even be aware of where he's gone wrong, and that can take much, much, much longer to rectify, and that's why the second Beis Hamikdash is much longer, the churban, than the first Beis Hamikdash. The nails of previous generations is greater than the stomach of the last generations. And again, the Mashal discusses this, and he says a nail is the least important part of the body. If a nail falls off, nothing happens. The stomach is the most important. If somebody gets hurt in the stomach, and he says that the most important aspect of our generations is nothing compared to the, so to speak, the flimsy things they did in earlier generations. Our generation is better. Even though we're suffering, we're still getting tail. The palace should prove it. We came back for the first Beis Hamikdash, and the second. We never came back for us in our Sholos of Lozo. What's greater, the first and the second? Look at the palace. The palace came back for the first Beis Hamikdash, not the second. Your witness is the Beis Hamikdash. Most before I explain, there's no difference. It's just a slightly different version of what he said. Either look at the Beis Hamikdash or take edus, take testimony from the Beis Hamikdash. Now, those who explain that he actually meant two different things, Ashur again says this, that Nechem Bebira was in the first Beis Hamikdash, only the roof was taken off. So therefore, look at the Beis Hamikdash and see that it wasn't completely destroyed. Nechem Bebira is referring to how long it took to get rebuilt. Okay. Rish Lakish have a sochi b'yardena. Rish Lakish was swimming in the Yarden. There's another Gemara that was swimming in the Yarden, and Yochanan met him, and what happened? And then he got him to come from, to tshuva. But the Ma'aser, here the Gemara got it. This was after he became a Talmid Chacham. So also Rabbi Chana Yav liyodo. Rabbi Chana gave him his hand to help him out. Omalei. So Shloki said to Rabbi Chana, I make a shvur in the name of Hashem. Sanino lechu, that I hate you. Imagine such a greeting. Shloki said to Rabbi Chana, I make a shvur in the name of Hashem that I hate you. Why? Akshvochu tells Kali so that if you behave like a wall, I'll encase you in silver. If you behave like a door, then what will happen is I'll surround you with wood. A wall, what's the difference in a wall and a door? Right. A door is flimsy in the sense that you can break through, you can open it, etc. A wall is like a barrier, it's a fixed thing. If Christ behave, this is the possible. If Christ behave with a strength, with a determination, Akshvochu is very, very happy with them. But if they're like a door which can be open, closed, sometimes yes, sometimes not, it's no good. The person has to have the famous story of Moshe Feinstein that once at the end of he was invited to speak at the Good Convention. He davened mincha, and it was his turn to speak. The person behind him hadn't finished. So he said, emotional, he can't come. Afterwards, they were all very upset with him. He kept everybody waiting. So he said, imagine if there had been a wall there and I couldn't have gone through. Would you have been upset with me? You would have seen there's a wall. And truth matters, halachically, sometimes when the person's davening, told me that his great uncle with 5 green blatt told him that when the person's davening and someone blocking the entranceway, you're allowed to walk past. This obviously you can't take the halacha, it depends where he was davening, maybe, etc. What?
Maybe don't want to speak.
Okay. But no, Moshe was very much like that. There's another very nice story. It's in the beginning of Chelek Ches of Moshe. Very nice story that there was somebody when he was involved in Russia. He was involved in Russia for a short time by communists. And he actually managed to make this local swimming pool a kosher mikveh. It's a very ancient story, but he himself never used it. And he once told one of his sons that for 8 years, we never had children because I wouldn't let your mother go to it. So therefore, for 8 years he was involved. But he managed, but one of the things that happened then, there was a certain Yid, unfortunately, became caught up in communism. And the Yid made it up. He called in the Chevra Kaddish and he said, I have terrible chalot of what I've done. I want you to bury me facing down, not facing up. Normally facing up. Bury me facing down. They came to Moshe and they said to Moshe, if we don't listen to him, and who knows, the communist officials find out, look, they could put such a... He said, no, halacha is a wall. You follow halacha, it's a wall. And what happened was, he had written a letter to the local communist officials that look afterwards, dig me up, because you see they hate communists, and you'll see as a proof that even though normally the berry face up, the hill will be facing down, and they dug him up. He was facing up, and he saved the killer from what's the word for it? From exile. But you see, it was a war. When it was a war, that's very interesting. He was like that's. So the Gemara says that if Christ would be war. So again, Shlokish told Rabbi, I make a sure in the name of Hashem that I hate you. Why? So he explained to it like this. How do you make yourself like a wall? And you don't come up in Me'ezah and you start to get kesef. They'll never have got moldy. You must remember, Baba Achana lived in Baba. So you came up like a door, meaning a bit up, a bit not. How many Yidden came up a second base Midrash? Does anybody know? Without looking. Oh, the article says it. I don't know, maybe it doesn't. How many does the article say? 42 or 43? I always remember to number 43,000. Okay, it must be around. Okay, 42,660. Okay, I was going to say approximately 43,000. Okay, the Mai says 42,600. How much?
360.
360, he said. 42,360. It's a very small number. So the Mai says, you never came up. My eras, in what way was like a sasmago? It's a worm that eats way through wood. My sasko basko, meaning like this. That wood, sometimes you've got wood and it's decayed inside because the worm's eaten it up. And you've got the outer shell, you haven't got the inner substance. So too, because Kaisar never came up with the second Beis Hamikdash, so to speak, the Ashras HaShechina was not substantial. And therefore it was flimsy. And the Gemara explains in what way did they have a flimsy? They had a baskol from Shomayim, but the Ashras HaShechina that exists in the first Beis Hamikdash, that they never had as a punishment for not coming up properly. But they still use baskol. So the Maisa, Rabbi Shlokish was annoyed with Rabbi, who was a resident of Bava. Why didn't you, well, not him, because he was 500, at least about 400-500 years, more than 400-500 years after the Beis Hamikdash, second Beis Hamikdash was built, but you come from a family that did not, I think there's a famous idea from many of them that the Crusades particularly attacked the cities of worms, etc., because these people never came. They were people that had gone into Golos by the first Beis Hamikdash and never came out the second Beis Hamikdash. So as a punishment for that. But the Maisa, what happens like this? That's what it says. Did Shlokish ever talk to Rabbi Baba Achana? That means, did he talk to him publicly? Rabbi Loza was the greatest Talmid Chacham they saw in Eretz Yisrael. Shlokish wouldn't talk to him. Why? Demanded if Shlokish would talk to somebody in the marketplace, they would give him a business without aiding. That means Shlokish was such a great person that if you talk to Shlokish in a public place, you knew that person was a worthy person. And Shlokish therefore was very careful only to talk to very, very great people. So he never talked even to Rabbi Loza in the public. So why would he talk to Rabbi Baba Achana? Now, I just want to explain to a couple of things. First of all, I want to say that Shlokish himself had been a robber. Ben Yehuda and quite a few others say that he bandit. Because he had been a bandit, he was particularly careful who he associated with. He did not want to be influenced for the bad. That's one very interesting idea for Ben Yehuda. Another point is, this only means in public. It doesn't mean privately, of course, he spoke to everybody. And also, I just want to say very briefly, I heard this story from Moshe Knopfler. He told me that when his father, Bill Knopfler, opened Shiur Torah, so there was shmuz going around, and man Shoshiva was upset. Because after all, it was competition for him. So what happened was, he asked Bill Knopfler, what time do you finish davening? And he went and met up with him, and he stood in the corner of Marston Road and Stanley for an hour, asking different questions in Gemara. Some random questions in Gemara. And everybody thought they were talking about something really important. They didn't know what they were talking about. But the corner of us nowadays is not as essential. When I was a child, the corner of Marston and Stanley was their corner to be. The epicenter. And why did he do that? Because to show him that he's chatting. He honored him. Like everybody asked him, what did he talk about? Nothing. It's just a show of Chashivos. It's an unbelievable story about Chashivos. Maisa. So Gemara asks a question, answers the Gemara. And by the way, you should know that the Rashi brings over here that a person should never lend money without aiding, ever. At least an aid echot or at least a shtar. You mustn't lend. Here the Gemara says that you give a business without. It's a terrible thing. I can't tell you how many times this always comes up as in the Torah. This actually comes up most, I would say more than any in the Torah, is that Reuven gives Shimon money, and then afterwards they argue why was the money given? Was it given as an investment? And therefore, what happens is sometimes people declare bankruptcy. People declare bankruptcy more than I ever realized. And therefore, what happens is, if I give it to you as an investment, let's say I give it to investment, what business do you have? I don't know. Okay, whatever business you have, what business do you have? You can't really declare bankruptcy, can you?
I've got lots of
You can do also.
I can, I'll be in a lot of trouble.
No, if I give you money and you declare bankruptcy and I give it to you as an investment, you're not going to pay it back. If I gave you money as a loan, you do have to. And you have to be very, very careful how you do it. What happens is people are not careful. And the reason is they sometimes want it to be not clear, because ambiguous. Oh, that's a nice word. Because they want afterwards to be able to claim a profit if it makes money without a shadow of ribis, and if it loses money to get it back. And if it's all completely wrong, when you lend money, you have to have ATM and make sure you've got every single detail. I was just now a very tragic story with somebody huge of money declared bankruptcy, and the one who declared bankruptcy is poor like anything, and the one who lent him money is wealthy like anything. And I'm not a big shaila. What's on the family members and everything else? Nice, that's a shaila. It's a very big shaila, because if he gave it to him as a loan, he oses it to him. He gives it an investment. He doesn't owe it to him. That's a big shaila. So the Gemara says, you have to change one of the people. Either it was a shlokish with Zevi, or that means either it was Rabbi Bachad or Rabbi Elazar or Shlokish Ze'evi, in order that the story should make sense. Okay, good, stop here. I'm going to tell you, the next Gemara describes the geography of many different countries. I do not have a good knowledge of geography, and I saw that the article itself writes about it, that what they have written is often conjecture. Conjecture is a nice posh word for guesswork. And because of that, I'm just going to read the next 10, 15 lines. And all it is the Gemara is going to tell us names of country where different people lived. But the reality is, what? See? Oh, maybe for the Big Sean. Can you do it for the Big Sean?